Gary Frey is both an entrepreneur, he's worked as an executive position, he's worked for Fortune 100 companies, and he's also a coach. And he will share with us what he thinks is a successful leader today and how he can help. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we have Gary Frey. Gary, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Katrina. It's great to be here.
Yes, so you have quite, a CV or a resume because you've done so many things. You're a podcaster that features behind the scenes of entrepreneurs. You're a coach. You've turned around companies. So tell us a little bit, what do you think today with all this experience, what are the most important attributes of a successful leader today?
Oh, that's a great question. I think understanding yourself, understanding your team, understanding your mission, understanding your core values are all critically important. And I think if you're going to put a magic bullet into one chamber, I would say the attitude of humility and serving others versus being served is paramount.
So serving others. Mm-hmm. So yes. In the context, because Alfred Hilton said there are three types of leaders: one that starts a business or a hotel in this case, one that maintains and makes it more sustainable and productive hotel, and then one that restructures it. How does this, you've given overall, self-development, having a mission, knowing your team, knowing your vision, having humility and serving. Does that overarching statement of Alfred Hilton, is it integrated in that? And can you specify, since you've turned around companies, what particular attributes?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it applies across that whole spectrum that you nicely listed, because there are definitely inflection points and there are definitely stages to a business growth. And I'm not a startup guy, but I've been brought into companies that were only three people to basically do a start over or, massive growth acceleration. And I've been brought into those that needed to they were going to either fold and go bankrupt, or we had to turn it around. Or even in an existing company, the biggest one that I was in was 160,000 associates or employees, but we called ourselves associates at Bank of America at that time. We'd gone from 80,000 to 160,000 in 2 years. And so it was a very well-established company. It was a global company, but I still think that management always sets the tone. And I don't care whether it's a one-person organization or whether it's a 300,000 person organization, management always sets the tone. And in my opinion, I've worked under some great leaders and some really horrific leaders. The great leaders always had a sense of humility and desire to serve other people more than they wanted to be served.
So what does it take for someone to develop, according to you, that humility and serving others? Do you think that you're born with it, or can you develop it?
I don't know, but here's what I do know. Because I think I did not have the level of humility that I do now at age 60 when I was brought into my first turnaround at age 28. And while I had I think a very strong moral compass, I wanted to do the right thing, I was very focused on building something of value and something that was notable. So noteworthy was probably pretty big. And quite frankly, I ran over some people like a turbocharged steamroller if they got in my way. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's true. Since then, I've had my teeth kicked in a few times, figuratively speaking, but I've gone through partner embezzlement. I've lost $30 million worth of us got blown up when one of my closest friends was at the helm of a private equity firm, and it blew up and found out he was a fraud. I mean, I've been through some crazy and horrible things that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. And those crushing experiences, quite frankly, seemed to push me into a choice that was very binary. Am I going to be bitter or am I going to be better? And the bitter is very self-absorbed, self-focused, licking the wounds, look at how I've been wrong, blah, blah, blah. And the better is like, what can I learn from that? What was my part in that? How do I get my eyes off of me and serve somebody else? And I wish I could say that I was the one but actually our vice chairman in this company that blew up had been the treasurer of Walmart before he retired at an early age. And when things were the wheels were starting to come off of this wagon of this company, he would stop the meeting, and he was the vice chairman. He was not the CEO. He'd say, guys, I got to leave. And he was in a different location. He was in one of our 11 locations around the country. And he said, I just got to go serve somebody. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, the news is too bad. I'm too depressed about this. And the best way for me to get my eyes off of that is to serve somebody else. And that has stuck with me from the moment I first heard that. And I heard him saying that in 2008, and then it just kept getting worse into 2009. So there's something about adversity that can absolutely accelerate that.
So explain that adversity, and it can accelerate that. So you meaning the bad experience this leader had, he rechanneled that energy in trying to help somebody else? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And the more adversity you have and the more you do that, you develop into a more humble and serving person. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I mean, there's a whole bunch of data out there now on the power of intentional gratitude and what it does actually in our brains. So there's something really powerful about that. And so it's cool that we're actually seeing data to reflect that. And quite frankly, in my experience, and that's what I can speak to best, I learned the power of intentional gratitude when my world was crashing down. We basically lost everything financially, personally, except for my house. The company blew up. We had lawsuits flying all over the place. We had invested in 2 Ponzi's on top of everything. It was horrific. And I honestly didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. I was disappointed when I woke up, and I wasn't going to commit suicide, but I was so low. Like every day it was bad news. And so intentional gratitude for me was not being grateful for the horrific circumstances, but it was finding gratitude in the midst of, in spite of those circumstances. And so I don't know that you have to go through some of the hellacious things that we went through to find it. Other people, I think, become pretty intentional of just being grateful for the breath that they're given every moment. I mean, look at COVID. I have had good friends that died early when COVID just hit the United States. So I don't take it lightly, but man, I got to tell you, every breath that I take, especially as I go to bed, I thank the Lord for each breath that I take. And yet, how many times do we take those things for granted? So I didn't have to lose my health, to be cognizant of that. But I think you can foster that whether you're going through difficult times or not. And the reality is we all face difficult times in varying degrees, but I don't know a person on the planet that has not dealt with adversity.
Yeah, so you say that you went through a major change where you would have maybe, pushed through people to get what you want. And what created this transition? You're telling me the outcome that you do intentional gratitude, but was this horrific experience of losing everything, did that change you, or what did?
It's almost been like there have been, if I look back over my life of 60 years so far, there are milestone moments, right? And a milestone moment for me up until that point was after the first turnaround when I was 28. At 31, I discovered my partner's financial improprieties. I caught him lying about finances that directly impacted me. And then I caught him the second time. Well, the betrayal of trust and all those things. And I ended up leaving my own company that had my name on the door because I didn't want to destroy him and I didn't want to destroy my name in Wichita, Kansas. And everybody in town knew my partner. He was 20 years older than me. He was a good guy that had made a series of bad decisions that negatively impacted me and had other consequences likely looming. So that was a moment, but that was like tiddlywinks compared to the devastation in 2009 when this company blew up and $30 million worth of us gets wiped out. I mean, the embezzlement was tiddlywinks compared to that. And then, I've experienced health scares with my wife and loved ones and other things that a lot of people deal with as well. But each of those moments where we realize, man, we are really not in control. It's those moments that have kind of built on one another. And I don't know that we ever get completely free, but there are moments that we can go back and say, okay, what am I going to do? What did I learn from these other moments before that can help me get through this moment and find joy in the midst of even really hard and sorrowful and scary moments.
Right. And I really went through it. So initially, what was your driving force to become an entrepreneur?
It's funny. The best boss I've ever had is still at Bank of America, one of the top female execs at that bank. I left there at the end of 1999, 2000, when I went to become president of bizjournals.com, but I've still stayed in contact with her for a long time. She's still such a great leader. And at one point a few years ago, she said, Gary, you're just such an entrepreneur. She actually wanted to bring me back and work for her at the bank. And I said, Helen, I'm really not. I'm not an entrepreneur. And I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs in my life. Entrepreneurs call the non-existent into existence.
I love that.
And, they really do. They just, whether it's they can't work for somebody or they've got this driving force that they can't help themselves, they see it. And in some cases, I remember early on in my career looking at some people like that and go, well, you're lying because that's not true. That's not, but in their mind, they could see it so clearly it just wasn't there yet, but what I have found is because I am a problem solver and I'm a relationship builder, I am very good at being able to come alongside somebody that had the impetus and dream, but they couldn't either get, the airplane off the tarmac on their own, or they were having trouble keeping it airborne, whatever. And I've been able to come alongside them. So I wouldn't say that I'm an entrepreneur. I love serving entrepreneurs. And my father was kind of an entrepreneur too. He was an educator, but he always had side businesses because, quite frankly, in the United States, educators aren't paid a lot. But he was very inventive and very out of the box thinking. And so I grew up as a child working with him because he had one leg. He lost a leg to polio when he was 17. And so I was his helper from the time I was a little kid. And so, and that's another one of those things that I think was so impressioning on me. I saw this man that many people respected in this little town that I grew up in, dragging a leg through life. And they would stare because, seeing a person drag a leg is unusual. And I always wanted him to be normal. I always wanted him to be able to run. And he never was able to do that. Not since I had been born, not since he was 17 years old. Well, so I didn't take that for granted. Anytime that I was able to exercise or run or do something athletic like that, I became thankful because it was so painful wanting and longing for my dad to be able to do that. So I think it's kind of, that has been drug into my life as well, no pun intended.
Wow. So you say your father's an entrepreneur, but you don't feel like you're an entrepreneur, and yet you work with them all the time.
Yeah, I think I am more of a business leader, and I've run companies. So I've been the president of 4. But that's different than starting something from scratch. And yeah, I've had my own consulting business and I've had a side business from the time I got married 39 years ago out of necessity, but it was not the things where I was able to employ a lot of other people. I didn't start. I was brought in along somebody that had.
So for you, the definition of an entrepreneur is somebody that starts something from nothing.
In many cases, yeah, I think so. The ones that I've seen that I just get fascinated with, and that's probably why we like featuring them on our podcast, the Anything But Typical podcast, is because, to launch into headwinds, starting a company is far harder than people think. It takes more time, more money, and more effort to get that thing airborne, and then to keep it airborne, kind of to Hilton's thing. I know guys that have grown it and they're like, it's outgrown me. Somebody else needs to come in, or I'm bored. I got to go start something else. I've worked with some serial entrepreneurs that have launched some very notable and fun, amazing and big companies, but they get to a certain point and then they're like, I'm bored. I got to go do something else. Time to punch out. And for them, most of them that I've known that I admire, especially, it was never about the money. It was always about the thrill of bringing something to life that was non-existent before.
So how do you help these entrepreneurs?
I think the biggest way that I help them, and you and your listeners would know this because they're coaches, outside the jar perspective. One of my clients once said, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. That's the best thing that a coach can bring. And I think because of all of these really weird and wild experiences that I had, that quite frankly, I didn't seek. I was a graphic designer early in my career. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I was good at doing. And I kept getting pulled into problem solving. Well, you problem solve as a designer, but I got pulled into these other things. And so I think that variety of experience definitely helps. And if I don't have what I think it takes for that particular client, I'll refer them to a coach that I think is better suited for them, either from a personality standpoint or a perspective standpoint or an expertise standpoint.
So what I understand is that you help entrepreneurs that have businesses that are somewhat derailed, and you help them retweet it. So can you tell us a little bit more and comment about how you help these entrepreneurs that are slightly derailed?
Well, they may not even be derailed. I've been brought into some of those where, it was just a rat's nest. I mean, it was just a dumpster fire in some ways. But I've also been brought into some that were kind of stuck. They had thriving and good businesses, but maybe the owner was burned out, or they really wanted to scale it, but they didn't know how to do that. And usually too many roads were leading to that entrepreneur or that CEO, and they didn't maybe have the right team around them. And so I use a number of different programs. I was trained in Vern Harnish's scaling up program. And then we also use Gino Wickman's EOS platform with our own company. And my own company has asked me to be the coach. And I said, no, I'm inside the jar. And so I brought in a former partner of mine who's a very good coach that has that outside perspective. And then I use some of my own tools that I've developed over the years because I got drug into coaching some CEOs and helping merge some companies back in the late 90s while I was still working 70-hour weeks at Bank of America. But it was just fun because these guys needed some experience that I had. I was able to do that as a little fun, kind of a sideline thing for me. So I think that's how I like using it. These other tools, and I love learning from others, but I think that's pretty much it. And it's a lot of times. So I'll give you one more example real quick. 4 years ago, a client came to me. They were doing about just under 6 million top line. And the owner had just turned down $3.5 million for his company. And he said, hey, would you coach me? So I'm like, well, why did you turn that down? And he said, well, he couldn't really answer. I said, well, are you running to something or are you running from something? And he couldn't really answer that. And I said, well, it doesn't sound to me like you're running to something. So what are you running from? What's hard? So he started kind of spilling his guts on stuff. So I said, okay, that's solvable. And he said, well, will you work with me? And I said, not as long as you're entertaining offers. And he said, why? And I said, because your team knows and feels your disenfranchisedness right now. I guarantee you. And until you are fully in, I'm not going to commit, because you've got to be fully in, and then we can do something. And so 3 or 4 months later, he calls me and says, I just turned down more money. I can't leave my own company. Can you help me? So we do. And one of the things that we did early on that became a massive catalyst to change for them was, one, I realized he needed a couple people that were critical around him that he didn't have those skill sets around. And then I do a thing called Thrive Wither. And I just created this for myself when I had to leave my own company. It's a simple T-chart, and you split the paper vertically, you draw a horizontal line at the top, you write Thrive on the left side, write Wither on the right side. And I say, write down all the stuff that makes you come alive first, just stream of consciousness, the Thrive stuff. Then put on the right side, the stuff that makes you wither. This is not strengths and weaknesses. This is what makes you come alive versus what drains your tank.
Right.
Because you may be really good and proficient at some stuff that you're just burned out on doing. You don't ever want to do it again.
So you
And
relate it always to what gives them energy and what takes energy. Great.
Exactly. And then I butt that up against a function accountability chart, which is, all right, so what are the main functions in the company? And then who has ultimate responsibility? Well, those two little exercises together, and the Thrive Wither is literally 30 minutes. And they outlined 14 major functions in this company. And I said, whose name is by the major function? Where does the buck stop? Well, the CEO's name was by 11 of the 14. And I said, well, no wonder you hate life. So I said, circle any of the ones that make you come alive, like you like those responsibilities. And he circled 3. Okay. Well, now I look around at the rest of the leadership team, and I know the CFO and COO because I put that person in place for them. And I said to him, I'm like, hey, any of those things that he did not circle make you come alive? And he goes, oh, yeah. And he circled about 3 or 4. Oh, hey, CEO, would you be okay if COO took some of those? He goes, how fast and how, soon? Okay, cool. Well, you're going to have to do that. Well, we had about 3 or 4 things that we just couldn't pull off the plate yet. I said to the CEO, you okay with that? He said, yeah. Within 4 months, 5 months, it was towards the end of the year, he just was beaming. And I said, man, you seem like you're doing really well. He goes, Gary, I can't wait to go to work every day. He said, and I knew that his wife was having some major health issues, had adopted a special needs kid that was really having problems. So it wasn't like all of a sudden life was easy, not at all. But he said, I can't wait to go to work. Well, that company has tripled in size, over tripled in the last 4 years. And he has entertained offers. People have come to him for almost 20 million to buy his company.
So basically what you're saying is that the attitude and the enthusiasm of top management sort of has a trickle-down effect throughout the company. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say to your younger self in this journey you've had with entrepreneurs?
Well, I think the biggest thing I wish I would have known then that I know now is this thing called imposter syndrome. I saw all of the stuff that I was not, and I tried to hide those things. And I have learned some very powerful tools for helping me get free of that, to realize, we're all anything but typical. And we all suffer from this thing called imposter syndrome to one degree or another. And that, a fast way of addressing that is to realize that you're not alone, to do this Thrive Wither thing that I just told you about, to shine a spotlight on it, to serve other people, to do a daily gratitude journal and embrace the fact that you're anything but typical.
Great. I think we should end on that because we're a little bit over time, but what a nice interview. And I thank you, Gary, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your experience with our listeners. And listeners, thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.